Hi, I'm John Paul, and a really warm welcome back to my channel. As you probably know, if you've been watching the channel for a while, I made a career change from a corporate career as a lawyer to one of being a therapist. And something I will get asked a lot is about how you get confident enough to do that. And also, a lot of the questions that I would be asked by people about that process, they're obviously trying to build some confidence in the change, that it's all going to work out okay. So that's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to be talking about this issue of confidence. I mean, generally what I'm going to be saying, I guess, is that I don't think it necessarily has to start with feeling confident. Equally, I'm also going to be saying some things which I really hope will build confidence for you as well. As ever, if you find this helpful, please do give it a like. I would appreciate it. Please do share it with anyone else you think might find it helpful. And also please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I would also love to hear from you with any questions, any comments below the video about what you think about all this, your kind of concerns or whatever, or excitement about potentially making the career change and what your experience has been up until now. And I guess what you're hoping for and things that may have helped you. So I would love to hear from you. So going back to this, the idea of confidence, the thing I wanted to say first, as I've just mentioned, is that I'm not sure it necessarily starts with feeling confident about the change. There is no way that you can know all the things that might happen. We don't actually know the route it's all going to take anyway. I would never have imagined, for example, if you're looking at imagination, that I would have been recording a video about narcissism and Snow White when I first started, or that I would be speaking in January at some kind of conference with Frank Bruno or Joe Marler. Would Katie Morton have thought that when she first started that she would have 1.5 million subscribers on YouTube and not actually be seeing clients anymore? You get the point. I suppose is what I'm saying is a lot of this is going to be a process over time which couldn't even have been imagined at the beginning. Equally, I'm going to be talking about some things which I think will help with confidence too. But that's the first thing to say. If I was going to talk about a process that happened, if we're looking at kind of intellectual frame for all this, I would say it started with making a choice at the beginning, and then moved to a process of competence, which would have been developed during the training and that kind of thing, and all the experiences around that, and then a place much more of clarity over time. And I think confidence I would have experienced much more during that period of kind of competence and clarity, which naturally follow, I think, making this initial connection with self and choice. So let me go back to that idea about connection and choice. What do I mean by that? As far as connection, that is making a choice based on something which is much more intellectually interesting to you, and also, most importantly probably, making choices based on your emotional experience and what feels good and what feels connecting to you, whatever that feels like in your body. You know, from my point of view, my journey here started by taking a career break. And during that career break, as you may know, I did 3 things. I did a foundation course in counselling and psychotherapy. I also did a screenwriting course and worked for a charity as well. It was a sexual health charity. Some of those things over that time I would have enjoyed much more than others. Some of the people that I would have met I would have liked much more than others. But the point is, I think, in life, when you start to make a choice, that is connection to self. When that choice is based on, as I say, what you think and what you feel. In my experience, the choice, in inverted commas, of going into law was really much more about the external, really, shoulds and ought tos. And internally was a choice much more based on perhaps some fear, but also more that kind of status. It wasn't really something that was a choice based on a combination of what I was interested in intellectually and what I felt good doing. But the act of, in the career break, choosing to do these 3 things, which sort of vaguely over time I thought, well, they seem interesting and they would probably feel good. No matter what happened during that period, the act of making a choice, I think, connects you to yourself much more, and that starts something which starts actually quite a natural process of moving more to this place of connection. That's relationship with self, of course. When you start to choose to go to courses on a Thursday evening or whatever, you also meet other people that have chosen to do those things as well. So you might start to meet more people that have a kind of like-minded view of the world, have similar values, and that process all builds on each other over time. So as you probably can get from this, I think the first step is connection to self and making the choice to do this. Connection to self as well, in that it's not hiding anymore, is it? And being honest. I think when we stop hiding, we connect. When I say hiding from the reality of when I was a lawyer, that wasn't something that was everything that I wanted it to be going into the future, that it didn't meet, for example, emotional needs, that it would have been adversely affecting how I was as a friend, as a partner, as a father, that it would have been affecting how much I could trust myself, actually. So this process of connection, I think, starts with honesty with self and not hiding. And when you start to choose, for example, to go to a course, you also are not hiding that part to others as well. You start to go out into the world with it. And whether with the screenwriting course that I did, I've never done anything in that again, but it was the very act of choosing. It was the very act of connecting with myself. It was the very act of being around other people that were doing the same thing that I really think started something which was going to end here. When I say end, it's a continuing process. So I think that's something really important to bear in mind. A lot of people will say, look, they're trying to make a choice about a course to go on. Do I do an existential course, integrative, psychodynamic? And I don't think there are any mistakes here. As long as you do a course which is accredited for obvious reasons, it isn't that you can do the wrong thing. If you make a choice based on what is interesting to you intellectually, and if you just, even in that half an hour or hour that you're there, where do you feel most connected? What resonates most with you? As long as you make your choice based on that, then you're doing this thing of being more inward out. You're doing this thing of being more connected to yourself, of prioritizing what you think and what you feel, which is something that potentially you may not have done as much in the world. If you're in a career which you feel quite disconnected from, up until this point, you probably haven't really been doing that. I remember when I was a lawyer, the partner who was responsible, who was kind of my boss, said the best thing that you can do, as far as marketing, of course, is to please clients. So it's very much in that place that what I was thinking about doing all the time was pleasing other people. Now, that's not a masochistic act. There are lots of great things about being a lawyer too. It's just that it was not something necessarily that connected with me intellectually, definitely not something that connected with me emotionally. And I will come on and talk about that at the end and tell a story, kind of comparing and contrasting then to now, really. And I think often, when you make these choices, so choose to do a course, say, in counselling or psychotherapy, and then act on it, that tends to, or that was my experience, it reduced that sort of internal conflict then. It reduced anxiety, actually. I mean, I was in environments, like I said, did a screenwriting course, which was in Birkbeck, so I was on a Thursday evening in an empty university in a part of London that I was unfamiliar with, in a room that, wasn't great, amongst strangers that I hadn't even met before, reading out something that I'd written. But oddly, I didn't feel anxious in the way that perhaps I would have done with the story that I'm going to come to, and a sort of financial close within a law firm. And I think the reason for that is the kind of people I was around. The reason for that is that I knew I was choosing to be there, and I knew I was choosing to be there on the basis that I thought I would enjoy it, and I did enjoy parts of it, but it's not something I've done again. But as I go back to, it's the fact that you're making decisions, or I was making decisions in that kind of inward out way, as opposed to a much more outward in life that it had been up until that point. I'd be at the Gestalt Centre in Shoreditch, 8 o'clock at night, walking up to some graffiti-covered car park, but I never felt like I regretted it, never felt like what on earth am I doing at all? Because the last few hours had been spent in a placement with some clients. So the experience that I'd had for the last few hours, it felt like I was in the right place there, like I was home with people, my clients in that case, who had sort of shared values and a shared way of looking at things. And I think when you sort of come home in this way, and you'll feel that when you feel home and alive in what you're doing, you know, in my experience, you get less fearful. So when you're in the right place, kind of emotionally, intellectually around, in inverted commas, the right people, and by that I mean the right people for you, of course, then that it reduces the internal conflict, less in arguing internally, probably less fear. You feel safer. You know, this idea that if you connection, when people feel connected to self and others, it meets all human needs. The need to connect, the need to feel reward, it's rewarding as well, and also you feel safe. And like I said, it's not a linear process this. There are times I would have felt connected, disconnected over that time. People I would have felt connected to, people I would have felt disconnected to. But largely, the feeling was so much more at home, so much more a place of connection with self and others that, there was no a point at which, with my 70,000 thoughts a day, that I would have looked back and regretted any part of this. You have 1 trillion neurons. I say those kind of things like I'm a neuroscientist. I read it once. We have 1 trillion neurons. We have 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. At the moment, if you're in a disconnected state, in a place that you feel disconnected to, quite a lot of those things will be, that those thoughts will be used up by fear and imagination, some arguments, why am I doing this? I feel bored, disconnected, resentment, frustration. But once those start to turn down, naturally, in its place comes more creativity, whatever connection to self and others looks like in your imagination and in your memory. That was my experience anyway. I don't think necessarily these things have to be forced. Creativity and those things naturally start to flow much more. Not a linear process, would have taken a few years as well, but on the way, always better, because of the elements of connection, the elements of choice, the elements that I was interested in it and around people that were more like-minded. It was always just a bit better than what I'd been doing before. I'd also like to say, as far as confidence, that people think when there's this change in career, moving to something that appears to be so different as therapy, is that if you're looking at developing competence, we don't get beamed down into a therapy college or a screenwriting college or a charity with nothing that we had before. You come in to those things, you come into those experiences with all of the skills and talents and competencies that you had before. Yes, for me, going from a corporate career to therapy, there was much more energy being put from a thought, feeling, behavioural place into that place of connection. But it doesn't mean that the drive was not valuable. It doesn't mean that I didn't have the survival part, which was also valuable. It just meant that there was sort of rebalancing things and probably putting more energy into this sort of additional psychological dimension. But completely, the values of drive, being able to get places on time, being organised, focus, consistency, determination, being able to carry on in a career for years, which I wasn't particularly enjoying, did serve me quite well when I was putting the car in some place in King's Cross to go to this charity that I didn't really know, but I'd made the commitment to do it. And I was very used to committing to do something even if I felt a bit nervous about it, I suppose. So what I'm saying is that there are lots of things, there are lots of personality traits, qualities which would have been developed and have served you in your, say, previous career, which will continue to do so now. If I go back to this at King's Cross and working in that charity, I was on a phone line, so people were calling up worried about their sexual health, in that case HIV, and I was nervous doing that. What I had to do when I was first started was to sit in a room with a headset on, surrounded by these very experienced people that have been doing it for years, who were, of course, making sure I was trying to make sure I was doing it okay. So you have a bit of training on it, and then you get you put this headset on and you're getting calls from people you don't know who are very frightened about having contracted what they would see as a sort of life-threatening illness. As I say, what they would see as that. I'm only trying to express the sort of distress and dysregulation that they were in. And of course, I was nervous. I knew people were listening, and it was a nervous person trying to reassure someone who is in a really desperate state. So those situations, they come with anxiety. They come with not knowing. Probably if I was to go back on the phone, even 10 years later, I would still feel a bit nervous about that. But I think the point there is that the anxiety, it is really attached to something which was much more meaningful for me. If that went well or went okay, that really meant something to that person on the other end of the phone, meant something very much to me, intellectually, but particularly emotionally, trying to help somebody to feel safer in the world, as I say, which is difficult when you're not feeling that safe yourself. But there is, that is an experience which, although associated with some anxiety, I wouldn't have felt confident doing for a while. I used to speak really quietly. So this woman that sat next to me, who was lovely, but I just didn't really want her to hear what I was saying in some ways, in case I said the wrong thing. It's probably quite a sort of lawyerly way of looking at things. Even with all that, as I say, some of the consistency of being a lawyer, you have to carry on, you've committed, would have made me come back, but also it felt meaningful doing that. It really felt meaningful. I'd also like to say, as far as developing, going from connection and choice through to competence as well, that I was wandering around London, going to these different places really on my own. If you're watching this channel, you're talking, listening to what I'm saying about it. So there is absolutely connection. There are ways of hearing other people's stories, which I think can be really helpful. The other thing that I would just say, which wasn't around when I started, which I'm not going to overstate, but it is a helpful thing if you're going through something alone in that way, is that and other people aren't always there to sort of understand. And people, if you're in, say, corporate careers, might just be carrying on in the corporate careers and find it difficult to understand or relate to why you want to make this change. AI, it can be a very helpful assistant, I suppose, in that way. I like AI from the point of view it helps people to feel safer often. I've talked in other videos about potentially if people overestimate themselves or become a bit detached from reality in some ways about themselves, it can support that, unfortunately. But in this case, if you're feeling a bit unsafe or a bit anxious, you want reassurance, you want intellectual help with things. When I say intellectual help, factual help, things that are soothing in that way, then you have potentially something in your pocket that can help you to do that. So I would have used that probably a lot more. Equally, social media probably wasn't as used as much when I was training and I was in my early stages. So social media is a great way, of course, to connect with other people as well and to work out, get clarity around your ideas, what other people are saying, what you want to say. I just would say generally with social media, it's slightly connected to all of this and slightly not, but it's something I heard, which I liked and I wanted to say to you, is that rather than focusing on making an impression on social media, focus on making a connection. And I think that actually does also go back to what I was saying at the beginning and the importance in all this of the priority through all of this journey. If you prioritize making connection with yourself, so prioritizing what you feel, not at the expense of others or in some sort of hedonistic way, but fundamentally our primary responsibility is to take care of ourselves and our dependents. And if you feel better about what you're doing, if you're moving through into a career that you're much more interested in, that you much more enjoy emotionally, it's going to be better for those people around you anyway. I will say a little bit about money next, actually. Well, let's do that now. So something as well in other videos that I've talked about that people do worry about and they may struggle with confidence is if you're particularly, say, corporate careers with these substantial incomes, moving through to working for yourself, moving through, as I say, to uncertainty. In my case, wandering around central London, going to something which I was not really sure whether I would enjoy or not. if money is a problem and is a worry for you, that's not going to help. So I think it's important, definitely, for that transitional period, to the extent you can, to plan financially for this change too. As I've said, if you want to get in contact to look at that, planning all this, I think it's a good idea to be doing that, and like to have a financial plan, and we can do that if that's something that you want to do. But if we're looking at money generally, a couple of things I would say about this, that I would have noticed in myself. Firstly, that my relationship with money changed over the period of doing this and doing the training. Of course, one of the main reasons for being a lawyer would have been the finances, really. I mean, it's never been that important to me, but if I'm going to sacrifice my emotional happiness, not that I would even necessarily have noticed that I was doing or been conscious that I was doing that, then you need to be paid well to do that. So that must have been an element for me before. But I did notice, as time went on, as choices were made based on what I felt emotionally connected to around other people that were doing something different, and that was the basis on which life was being navigated, my relationship with money, status, appearance, those things really did change. So I would also wait and see what happens over time. Like I said, I would really try to manage that short to medium term transition. But if you're coming into this thinking, and I also need to make as much money in 5 years' time as I do now, or if I was going to be a partner, it would be some £1 million partner in where I work, Denton's. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know. But therefore, I need to be making £1 million as a therapist somehow for it to be okay. I would just see what happens in terms of your relationship. When people rely more on connection with self and others, it is significantly rewarding and helps people to feel safe. So it's probably a more oxytocin type thing, therapy is, than necessarily dopamine. But once we have more oxytocin in our lives, I think we generally are drawn less to other aspects of life. I also want to say I'm not a therapist, as you probably know, or a person who thinks that there ought to be a sacrifice between, living a life which is more connecting and rewarding for you and finances. I don't see that at all. I don't see why they should be opposing each other. I completely understand why people sacrifice money in order to enjoy something that they love doing, which is much more meaningful for them. I'm just saying I don't think that has to be the case, that something has to be given up in order to do something that you enjoy. The value of it to you is going to be a lot more outside of money, but that doesn't mean when you're doing something which can be so valuable to other people that you shouldn't be reflected somehow in money. This is of significant value. I mean, when I was a lawyer, I'll just tell this a story now. I'm going to mention, compare and contrast memories just in a minute. But when I was at a financial close, all this sort of flurry of activity, there was this client that I was showing back to the door after financial close had happened. And he went to get his coat from the receptionist. And this receptionist, I tell you, if you worked at Denton's at the same time that I did, you would know her name, I think. She was notorious might be the wrong word, but she was a really, really lovely woman. She's so smart. She made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. She really had this capacity to make you feel seen and heard, I felt. And I say that because everybody would say that to me when I took clients up to meeting rooms about this receptionist. Anyway, this client of mine, we'd had financial close, so that all the documents, the money, all those kind of things that all happened, and he went to get his coat from her, and they had this interaction. And then he came to me at the lift. As I say, I was showing him out, and he said, she's worth her weight in gold for you. She is your secret weapon. Everybody in the city can do this as far as financial close or the kind of legal stuff. But she is your secret weapon in terms of how she makes people feel. It might sound like a strange thing or a kind of unusual thing for someone from a sort of corporate environment to say. But what that really showed me in that moment was the value and importance of how you make someone feel. Of course, the other things need to be there as well, but how the thing that often people are looking for, is to feel a particular way. And as I've said in other videos, there's absolutely something about moving from that place of disconnection to connection that is about feeling very different. It's about feeling very different in life, and that is the thing that's of most value. I mean, often that's the thing that's of most value to all human beings. Like I say, I think it starts with choice. It starts with connection with self and others. There'll be anxiety all the way along, and then you'll do your course, and then things start to settle more. You start to get an intellectual frame for things. We start to understand ourselves and other people much more based on making these choices. So competence increases, and when that happens, things become much clearer. And that happens, then that confidence is really there, and we know what we're standing on. And I just wanted to say, the very difficult thing when people are moving from a place of, say, disconnection within corporate environments to wanting to do a more connected career is knowing what that feels like. There is in some ways the stick of the current situation, but how do we know what the carrot is? So I'm just going to do a compare and contrast in some ways. This is, a very personal thing for me, but hopefully it will help you in terms of thinking about the kinds of how you can use your imagination and also your memory to help on this process as well. So going back to that financial close situation where I was just talking about my client and the receptionist, what had preceded that was a formal financial close for some massive deal. It was one of the first times that I was running the financial close room, a dubious honour. What did that involve? Well, I was doing the project agreement as well for the project. It was building a huge hospital in the UK, and there were hundreds of documents. And what happens on financial close is these hundreds of documents are all set out in a room: banking documents, employment ones, tax, corporate, the project agreement, and throughout the day you're having financial close that day, and that's when the money changes hands, goes from one bank to another. I don't even see it, but that happens. Then all the documents are dated. That was this process, and for me, that process was the culmination of 18 months of work on this document. So what was it like? It's very frenetic. So what are the kind of chemicals in the body, I suppose? There's lots of adrenaline, cortisol, and all these lawyers and other lawyers from the other side, they've all got their documents that they're responsible for. So you're in this big room, or I was in this big room, and these other lawyers are rushing in and out with their the person from the other side, and perhaps they've got the client in there, all trying to agree or finalise the terms of their documents. Not that we should be finalising the terms of our documents on the day of financial close, but that was just life, unfortunately, in these situations. So, what was I seeing? I would be seeing lots of people coming in and out, all, engaged intellectually, I suppose. But what they were trying to do, really, is avoid being the people that held that financial close. And that feels like something in terms of the body, doesn't it? That is stressful. Stress can be addictive, by the way, but that is, stressful. And what's the best you can get, or what's the best I got when financial close happened, was relief that it was over. And I do remember that my boss at the time, bear in mind, this was a big thing. I just organised financial close, came up to me and he said, "Well done." After 18 months, but he also said, one of the clients did say that they'd seen better organised financial closes in terms of the documents. And I just, at a moment like that, I sort of had a half a glass of flat champagne, but at a moment like that, I thought what stretches out in front of me is the next project, which I wasn't really that interested in intellectually, and certainly did very little emotionally for me. That was going to be the future. Let's just fast forward to a comparable memory, I suppose, with being a therapist, just to show this place of moving from one of disconnection, I would say, to myself and perhaps others. When I think about the other people in the room there, they all had their backs to me. They were trying to negotiate documents. They were in and out, and they're moving on to the next thing. But let's fast forward to this place much more of connection, I would say, being a therapist. And a comparable memory, of course, there are so many connection memories that I could talk about with clients, but from the point of view of confidentiality and all of those things, I won't do that. But certainly it's a very different experience, hour after hour with clients to that disconnected one of being in the financial close room. But just comparing a sort of group situation, I went to my college's 40-year celebration a couple of months ago. Again, it's a big room, like it would have been for financial close, with lots of people. But in this situation, there were, I don't know, probably a similar number, about 30, probably therapists who'd all been clients, or maybe clients as well at the time, but lots of therapists. And we were in the ballroom at college. And there were these series of events to kind of celebrate things. And one of those things was that a guy who'd been, I think, on reception, I mean, hadn't been back there for 10 years, but I think he was somebody that was on reception, had learnt to play the piano. So what they'd done is suggested of the grand piano at the front of the ballroom that he play a piece that he'd written on the piano. And he sat down and played. It was sort of a dimly lit room, and all these therapists watching. And he started to play it, and it was really pretty. It was beautiful. But then he started to make mistakes, and probably started to get slightly anxious about it. But he carried on. And then he made another mistake, and he stopped for a few seconds, and then he carried on. And he carried on to the end, and he got up, and everybody applauded, and it was this really lovely thing. And I looked over the room then at everybody, because I could at that moment, of course, I was with my friend, give him a nudge when things weren't going well. And I could just see that everybody was just enjoying this thing, enjoying as well, even though he'd forgotten certain things, or was probably anxious, slightly uncomfortable. We all stayed, we all watched, and he continued. He didn't get up, he didn't walk off, and it was just lovely to watch something that somebody had created that was beautiful, that wasn't perfect, that was perfect for its imperfection in some ways. And when I'm thinking about going back to that financial close room, no one's going to comment on the imperfection. Nobody cares to say imperfection, but you know what I mean, on the mistake. That's not what this world now, as far as therapy and connection to self and others, that's not the value, that's not the priority. This playing this piano, playing this piece was just a celebration of what the amazing things that human beings can do that aren't always going to go perfectly, I suppose, and yet everybody's still there and people enjoy it. There wasn't quite, if you were looking at a celebration of 40 years of a college, I'm not, you could say what was the point, I suppose, of that. But nobody was going to say, as this guy said, or the client said at financial close, that I've seen better organised financial closes. And I'm not criticising that aspect of human beings. I'm just saying that being in a place of connection where things are safer, where people take joy from people's humanity and from connection, and understand not, that the development through something is not linear for people, that's a much safer, and for me, much more enjoyable and connecting place to be. And I just wanted to finish off by saying I'm not in any way suggesting from that point of view that it's all only about connection with self and others. I think there is a huge place and a very valuable place within being a therapist and running a successful business with that drive place, which, as I say, was probably much more associated with being a lawyer. As I said earlier, those skills, qualities of focus, of organisation, of determination, consistency, whatever it might be, are very valuable from the point of view of running a therapy practice. If you're looking at YouTube, running a YouTube channel, I remember Katie Morton she said it's a small business that you're doing. So you can absolutely, excitement, goals, those more kind of focused, goal-driven places and determination and drive, increasing money, increasing income. How is the business going to develop? You can do all of those things as well, being a therapist. They are not contrary to connection as I've said perhaps in other videos, for me, they're hooked onto now connection. They would serve what gives me meaning and purpose, and hopefully other people too. And that is the place now which I would say that I've moved through to. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I did go on a bit. Do let me know what you think. I'd really appreciate, as I said at the beginning, hearing from you and any comments you might have, any ideas for future videos as well. Please do let me know. Thank you for watching. I do appreciate it, and I shall see you again soon.